My name is Chris O'Neill. I am the head of cinema at Triskel Arts Centre in Cork, Ireland. And this summer, we are doing a season of films dedicated to the work of director Adrian Lyne. And I'm delighted to say that Adrian has taken the time to have a conversation with us about his work. And hopefully, this will be a nice addition to our program for our patrons to hear some of your thoughts. So thank you so much for joining us, Adrian.
Oh, I'll do my best.
So, one thing that I find really intriguing about your work is you seem to be drawn to material that sparks debate rather than necessarily being commercial. Would you agree with that?
Think so. I mean, I've always liked the small picture. I like the movie to be about you and me. I like the audience to be able to put their feet in the shoes of the actors. And so I've always, as I say, always been more interested in the small picture than the big one, the big canvas, like Matrix or whatever. I like it that the audience is talking about your film the next day and haven't forgotten about it by the evening, by supper. I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I mean, obviously, two of your films in particular that I think are Fatal Attraction and Indecent Proposal, they were films that sparked a lot of debate outside of even cinema debate, if you know what I mean, without outside of critics, outside of cinema goers, like people were just discussing the scenario and those concepts and those characters and the situations they find themselves in.
Well, happily, I think my feeling about a script does tend to coincide with the audiences, which is lucky. Maybe I've got a little bit of a nose for what audiences may be interested in. However, if you look to please an audience, then that's a disaster. You're dead. I've never done that. I've always done a script that I've liked that I haven't been able to put down. I mean, for example, with the Indecent Proposal, I didn't really like the script particularly, but I just thought it's a marvelous idea, a stunning idea of whether you would sleep with somebody for $1 million, and if you wouldn't do it for 1 million, would you do it for 10? Would you do it for 20? What's the price? That's a fascinating question, I think.
I get the impression from what I've read and from interviews I've watched and listened to with you, you like filmmaking to be a challenge. Do you think that you thrive on like conflict and challenge in terms of the filmmaking process?
Again, that's an interesting thing to say, really, because I've only done one movie digitally. That was the last one, Deep Water, and it was marvelous that you didn't have to wait 4 hours for somebody to light the shot and then have an hour to shoot it in, which invariably is what used to be what happened. So it was easier, the process, than on film. But I've sort of wrestled with it afterwards, I'm not sure that it doesn't have to be difficult. I'm not sure that making the process easier makes you maybe a little less critical. I don't know why, but I've maybe it's a good idea that the magazine runs out after 10 minutes, and now I can think a little bit about it. Now I can maybe maybe I can go and talk to the actors, or maybe they can refresh a little bit. Just what I'm saying is, I'm not sure that it shouldn't be difficult, the process. So it's just sort of beating yourself to death, which I've always done. I mean, I can never understand, when a director will say, "Oh, well, why would you do all those takes?" But if you don't do that number of takes, then you're not unearthing. You have a chance of mistakes happening. You have, which are always great if mistakes are so interesting, rather than the scripted scene. So I think it's good that you explore it, that you beat it to death, because the worst thing on earth I would have thought would be to go away from the scene thinking, "Oh shit, I wish I'd tried that,"
Yeah. The season that we're hosting of your films is called Little Pieces of Humanity, which is a quote
Right.
I got from the podcast you did with David Dye, excuse me. What I liked about that was it's those little tangible details in your films, in scenes, it's those moments that make the audience relate to what they're seeing on screen in some sort of small way. And it's like sometimes it might be those mistakes or it might be those little added little moments that weren't expected, you know?
Well, I always look for layers in a scene so that you get a sense that the scene didn't start at the clapperboard. I loathe the whole process of filming, the idea of a clap at the beginning, somebody yelling for silence and the red light and all of that. And you create a mini sort of melodrama every time you do a take or you do. So I've always tried to make it as not like filming as I can, so that I put the clapperboard on at the end often, and I'll do 2 or 3 takes running, so that I'll make them go back to the beginning, without cutting the camera. But things, I've taken a great deal from my own relationship, with my wife. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, for example, I did a movie called Unfaithful with Richard Gere and Diane Lane. And there was a scene that I liked, when he knows that she's having an affair, or he has an inkling that she is. And she comes down to his office and she says, "Do you need anything?" And he said, "No, I'm fine." And she goes, "Are you sure?" "No, I'm fine." And you sense the tension between them. And then he says, "Con, do you love me?" Just out of the blue. And then she's, "Of course I love you. I mean, what a silly thing for you to ask." And he says, "I guess I'm feeling silly," he says. And then she says, "I'll see you in a minute." And she goes out of the room and she puts the light off on him. And then she quickly puts it back on. And it's a marvelous metaphor for her trying to cut him out of her life. She's thinking about the other guy. And I actually stole that from, hopefully for another reason, but I stole that from a moment with me and my wife Samantha, and I love that stuff. And there was another thing in Indecent Proposal, for example, when they have a fight, Woody Harrelson and Demi Moore, and I was having a fight myself again with my wife, and in the middle of the fight, I mean, not a fisticuffs, I mean, just hooting and hollering. And in the middle of it, I saw that she had these big yellow gloves on. She had been doing the washing up, and there were suds coming off them, the soap suds. And in the middle of the fight, I was thinking, "Fuck, I've got to use that. I've got to use that in a film." And I used that, as I say, with Demi Moore. And again, it's a specific, it's a layer that suddenly said, this is a real fight. This isn't something that started at the beginning of the scene, with the clapperboard. And so I'm always looking for that stuff. I just love it. I love it. And I think that the audience grabs onto it, and without necessarily recognizing exactly what it was in the scene that they like, it makes it authentic. It makes it believable, credible.
Mhm.
There's another thing I want. But I was in a cafe just around the corner here in Tribeca, and we're having a coffee or whatever. And I was looking at the sidewalk, the pavement, and there was a woman who was going past with her kid. The kid was probably 9, something like that. And she was walking down the sidewalk, and the boy had his jeans rolled up to his knee, just one leg. And I thought, fuck, I wonder why he's done. Was he stung? Did he fall over and graze his knee?
Mhm.
But suddenly, this was a real child. It was a real child and not an extra. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I just love that shit. And I know that if providing I have enough movies to do, I know I'll put that in a movie because instantly, again, the audience will recognize this, that it's a real scene, that it's a kid who's walking along with one trouser leg rolled up.
I remember seeing Jacob's Ladder,
Yeah,
and what really grabbed me about it, besides the psychological horror elements, etc., was
yeah,
it really felt like lived in. Like the use of locations, it really felt like world building. Like it really felt like when the camera's not rolling, these places exist. These people
right.
populate these places, you know. Obviously, what we were talking about a moment ago was to do with characterization and performance and little details and people, I should say, and that's wonderful. But even just there's something about the way your production design creates these lived-in locations. Like I said, they feel credible to me. And is that something that you really like take pride in? Is that something that you really focus on, do you think?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, I always, where possible, I always shoot on location because no production designer really gets the dirt right around the doorknob or around the light fixture or whatever it is. I mean, the good ones do. But for example, the apartment that Tim Robbins lived in with Elizabeth Pena. So I was looking with Brian Morris, who was a terrific production designer. I was looking with Brian in Williamsburg in New York and I found a marvelous apartment. But it was about a foot and a half too small on width and length.
Mhm.
And so what he did is he reproduced exactly, and we took their props, everything. We took everything out of the apartment and shot it in the studio. But it had all the bits and pieces, the aquarium, the same bike up against the wall or whatever it was. And I think it worked quite well because there literally wasn't quite enough room in in the apartment, the real
Mhm.
apartment. Yeah, that stuff's so important. I mean, just to I mean, it's tough enough to make them believe without it being real, without
Mhm.
the location being real.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely, and that's a quality that I see throughout your work. Even going back to say, like the opening scene in Foxes, when it's
Right.
the Jodie Foster's bedroom,
Yes.
um, or in Fatal Attraction, the family household again at the beginning of the film when they're all trying to rush around get ready. There's just this nice lived in quality that I just think's very effective I'm not surprised to hear that you go the extra mile to achieve that, you know.
Well, I mean, I'm like in that scene. There was a program, a kids program that my daughter Amy loved, where they poured that sort of jelly slop stuff over other kids. The
Yeah.
sort of paint stuff, and I'd watch her watching that endlessly. So I put that in. She would also eat these Fruit Loops that don't have now, I don't think, which
Mm.
she'd wrap around her finger, and then suck them. And I just love the sort of, again, those bits and pieces. And later on, Michael Douglas, towards the end of the movie, picks up one of his daughter's Fruit Loops and eats it himself. So there's a nice sort of
Hmm.
joining up of the characters.
Yeah, it's a
I
nice
love
quality.
that.
Yeah, it brings it full circle.
I mean, there was another thing. There was a scene in Fatal Attraction that I think is quite interesting. It was a scene where she's talking about wanting to go up to upstate New York and get him to see this house that she'd seen. She loves the house, and it was kind of a boring scene. But he's talking to her, and so I, instead of having him talk opposite her, I thought it was interesting that she was in the kitchen and he was in the sitting room with his daughter, with Ellen. And again, I stole from my daughter Amy, who would endlessly do card tricks with me. She would say, pick a card, pick a card. And she was only 5 or something, and they never worked. It was always a disaster. But the process was so charming and so lovely of her fumbling around with the cards that I used that as again as a layer in the scene.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, the scene that was boring and expositional suddenly becomes a lot of fun because of
Hmm.
his relationship with his kid,
Hmm.
playing the cards.
Yeah. Actually, referring to such scenes in, say, Fatal Attraction, with, say, Fatal Attraction and, say, I thought so with your recent film, Deep Water, when you're watching a relationship on screen, there can be this uncomfortable quality where the way the interactions are with their children, with each other, whatever, can be recognizable. For example, like that moment you just mentioned there in Fatal Attraction, there's that charming moment in Deep Water, your most recent film, where the little girl's singing, I think it's Leo Sayer in the car.
Is yeah.
Yeah, and it's just those charming moments with the children, say, in the families where they're sweet and they're nice and they're lovely to see, but at the same time, they kind of reinforce a credible family dynamic. So when something sinister is going to happen to them or is happening to them, it kind of makes it that little bit more uneasy to watch, I think, if that makes any sense.
I think it does. I mean, again, in the novel, he adored the daughter, but loathed his wife pretty much. I mean,
Hmm.
I made him in the movie, I made him a little bit more ambivalent about his wife in that he he was obsessed with her, but angry and jealous. But via that, he was also excited sexually.
Hmm.
So it was a, so that was something that didn't exist in the novel. It was really fairly simple. He loved his daughter, and pretty much loathed his wife, and eventually he killed her
Hmm.
right at the end. So I sort of changed the dynamic a little bit to make it a little bit more complex. But it's not a pleasing thing necessarily for the audience. So do you understand what I'm saying?
Hmm.
It's not necessarily an audience pleaser. I found it more interesting to go that route, but I don't think it necessarily endears you to the audience.
Hmm.
But I've never really worried about that. I mean, luckily, my feelings and the audience's feelings have quite often coincided, but I don't think they necessarily did with this one, with Deep Water.
Well, it's interesting. The filmmaker Toby Hooper, I remember there was an interview with him I saw some years ago. He said in this town, being Hollywood, he said the most frequent word he would hear is explain. You have to explain
Oh,
everything. You can't leave anything too
I know.
ambiguous. You need to let the audience know, spoon feed them. And that's what I liked about Deep Water, and it didn't spoon feed us or whatever. It really was like, what's going on here? Okay, okay. But I think it makes it more intriguing. And it's like, where is this going to go? What is the background? And you figure it out as the film progresses rather than having a clear-cut idea precisely from the get-go.
The trouble is, if you explain everything, then they're not having to work things out, the
Mm.
audience, they'll fall asleep, literally. So I think that's craziness,
Hmm.
if you explain everything, then why see the movie? I mean, where's the thought process?
Hmm.
Where's the that notes? I have a horror of notes. You'll get our notes. And I mean, and almost inevitably before you get the notes, even if they're spectacularly good, you react with such hatred. Notes, the notes. I dread it.
Well, to think about preview screenings and how films can change and evolve from that process, one of your films that I understand did have quite a unusual path from what was shot and what was released was 9.5 weeks. I understand that that film was one that through the dreaded notes and maybe through what people thought of the film when they saw it. They couldn't handle it. They found it quite a dark story, and it kind of changed as it evolved. I mean, I love the film, by the way; it's one of my favorites. But I
There
was
was
just
nothing,
curious. Hmm.
there was nothing left, really, nothing left in the movie, in the domestic movie, the movie that came out in in the US was meaningless. I mean, it was a sadomasochistic relationship, and every iota of that was cut out of the movie. I mean, for example, the scene with the where she picks up the dollar bill, she's on her hands and knees, and it's a key scene really. And he's Mickey is cracking his belt around it. I mean, he doesn't hit her, you know, but
Mm,
he's frightening her, and it's this weird mixture of her excitement with an element of fear, which was
hmm
what the movie was about. When it was shown in its proper form, or that, you know, pretty much its proper form in Europe, you know, then they came. I mean, the movie played in Madrid and Paris for 5, 6 years. It just went on and on, you know.
Thankfully, these days, the version that we saw in Europe, I think, has become the standard version. I think the
Yeah,
original
yeah,
American cuts become, you know, like
pretty much.
is unavailable these days. But even like, was there material in the initial shooting stage of the film that didn't make it even into any version of the film? Was it a much darker story, or um,
Well, there was a scene. Yes, it was darker. I mean, there's a scene I didn't shoot, which I think I should have shot. That was in the novel, and also there was a scene that I shot and I didn't put in. And think it was probably right not to. It was a scene where Mickey and Kim are sitting opposite each other at a table, and he's got a glass of wine, she's got a glass of wine, and they're taking pills that he says are sleeping pills or whatever, and he's seeing if essentially she will commit suicide for him. It's like it's a kind of a suicide pact. And it was actually I mean, it was a good scene. It's interesting at the beginning. You didn't feel, it was right at the end of the relationship between them. And I didn't feel that she was as sort of devastated by the relationship as she should have been, and sort of worn out by it. And I said, we got to do something to sort of break her down, to feel that this is the end of the.
mhm,
And I remember he leant across and just held her hand, you know, and wouldn't let go. We didn't hurt her in any way, but she became frustrated and started to cry, and then more so. And I know that she knew that he was helping her in the process. And then she
mhm,
started, and it was a fantastic scene, but it was very black.
mhm,
And I think it's good that essentially that it wasn't in. There was a robbery in an elevator. I remember that they did with a knife, because he was pushing her the whole time, pushing her.
mhm,
And I took that out, and I don't regret that. There's another one, which I thought was very interesting, and the essence of it. But I thought that I would get murdered, and I was actually I was scared of doing it, scared
mhm,
of shooting the scene. And it was a scene in the novel where he's watching a ball game. It's just she's standing on the wall, not on it. She's just standing. She has handcuffs, and they're over her head, some sort of a hook or whatever.
mhm,
And at the beginning, she's bored because he's watching a ball game and ignoring her. And then it starts to hurt a little bit. And still, his attention is on the TV, and he ignores her. And now it starts to hurt her sort of for real. And now she starts to cry. And he turns the TV off. I don't know whether he turned it off, but he goes over to her. And with her crying, they have sex, and it's like the fuck of the century, you know, like and what the relationship actually was, which was a sort of a mixture well, it's a sadomasochistic relationship, and so it involved pain to an
Hmm.
extent. In LA, when we had previews, it would be bedlam. Literally, there'd be shouting and yelling at the screen. It was extraordinary. Half of the audience would walk out. Literally half, 50% walked out. There was one particular screening I remember at the theater at MGM, I think, when I thought, shit, I don't want to be around at the end. I went because all of the executives were at the back sweating, right?
Hmm.
Everybody was walking out, they're screaming and yelling at the screen. So I went and I hid in the projection box and, and appeared at the end. And God, if you only knew. I mean, it was insane. I mean, you could blow somebody's head off and nobody will even think about it
Hmm.
over and over and over again in America. Do whatever you can think of, you can do, and nobody blinks an eyelid. But if it's to do with sex, then it's very different.
Hmm.
Very different.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the American system, rating system and everything, it's a strange one. In regards to filmmaking, what would be your favorite part of the production process? Would it be the research? Would it be the shooting? Would it be the editing? Like, what do you think's the part that you enjoy the most?
Like it all, really. I mean, I'm thinking about a film. I've got a film that I want to make called One Neck, and I love this period because I'm not shooting it, I'm not preparing it, I'm not editing it, but I'm thinking about it endlessly.
Mm.
And so rather than writing down my thoughts, ideas in little, I used to have those tiny little, they were lovely little notebooks, those
Hmm.
weeny ones. And I would lose them inevitably. But now I've got a thing on the iPhone called Notes. And so I'm writing down stuff. I've got acres of stuff when I just sort of think of details, just little bits and pieces to put in. Again, layers really, stuff to
Hmm.
add. Does he have a tick? I mean, this character, he's a serial killer. Just to make the thing memorable.
Oh, I hope that happens soon for you, because
I really,
yeah.
I hope I can get the money to do it. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not that expensive, but it's very good. It's very good writing. It's a
Hmm.
guy called Todd Alcott. It's all in the writing, really.
Hmm.
That period is lovely. Because working with him, it was great because I mean, it lasted 2 years or maybe more. Actually, not 2 years, 20 years. I've been talking. I was going to make it with the Weinsteins, with Harvey, literally 20 years ago.
Mm.
And then I went on and I made Unfaithful instead. So I've been talking this thing has been sort of altering over 20 years. It's been marvelous. And I can ring him out of the blue and say, what if we did this? Or what if he heard that? And then he'd write it up. He's a marvelous writer. I've always said all they do, writers, is let you down. Doesn't matter
Mm.
what the name, how famous they are, all they do in the end is let you down. But if this guy doesn't, he's marvelous.
Wow, I'm delighted to hear it. And I've heard you talking about that project before, so I hope that does happen soon because it sounds
Yeah, me
great.
too. I really want to do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a black comedy. It's like nothing I've done really.
Mm.
It's violent. But also very funny.
Hmm. That sounds great. Something you mentioned, we mentioned earlier in terms of the actors and things like this is, would you say this is fair to say about your work? Is I think your visual style to some extent might be quite precise, but you love at the same time spontaneity of finding things in scenes and things with the actors. Do you think that's a fair assessment in terms of the visuals, yet the relationship with the actors and things like that?
Well, I think the scene should tell you how to shoot it, not the other way around.
Mm.
You shouldn't impose a visual on a scene. That'd be crazy. And I see that the whole time. So I think it has to be the scene telling you how to shoot it, rather than it becoming a sort of an exercise in style.
Hmm.
Well, ironically, I think if I was to shoot 9.5 weeks again, I would do it in a more documentary way. I wouldn't do it, I did it in a kind of a semi-stylized way, but I'm not sure I would now.
Hmm. That's an interesting thing, looking at how you would approach material at different points in your life, I suppose, you know. One thing that's very something it's very prominent in your films is music.
Yeah,
And like sometimes you obviously have an original score, but other films have a mixture of an original score, original songs, or songs that are pre-existing that are used in throughout the film. I mean, for example, with Indecent Proposal, you have that beautiful, wonderful, romantic, lush John Barry score. Then you have some wonderful original songs that were, I believe, for the film with Roy Orbison and the
yeah,
Pretenders.
yeah.
But then just one scene that really unnerves me in that film is that use of the David Bowie and Brian Eno track when Woody Harrelson's walking through Vegas and there's bank of monitors.
Oh,
And that
good, good.
song, I think it's called All Saints, I think, it really puts me on edge. And it's like a weird juxtaposition compared to the way the music's used elsewhere in the film, you know? So sorry, that's me going off on a little tangent about that there. But in terms of like how involved do you get with the music process, I suppose, in your films?
Oh, enormously. I
Hmm.
mean, totally, to be honest, totally. I mean, John Barry wrote a tune, and I've forgotten who the singer was, but she was very well known at the time, for the titles at the end. And then I heard that Roy Orbison song, which I thought was marvelous, "The Love So Beautiful," I think it's called. And so I put that in, and John Barry was enraged. He was very pissed off that I hadn't used what he had recorded for it. And then he heard the Roy Orbison song, and he cried. He literally burst into tears, but he was crying when he was listening. So it was,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So and he said something like, "Of course."
interesting. So, I won't
I mean,
keep
I
you. Oh,
I
sorry.
find that I find it so important. I mean, I've used a tune I really like it, "The Nearness of You." I've used it in two or three of films, certainly in Indecent Proposal and also in Fatal Attraction. And I remember in Fatal Attraction that because it was expensive, they didn't want me to use the Bill Evans version of "The Nearness of You," which is just breathtaking and
Hmm.
fit perfectly in between the dialogue. I think Glenn's dialogue. I forgot. It was when they first met in the restaurant, and they tried. I mean, they went on and on about, "Oh, we get a session musician there. You don't need to do that." But I went apeshit. I said, "No, this has got to be this," because it fit beautifully between the dialogue. I think you've got to go to war about this stuff.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you'll lose. It's a battle, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, two examples there. One being, changing something that the composer initially wanted, and then him agreeing,
Yeah,
and
yes.
then you have this other situation where it's like a rights thing or music licensing or whatever, and but it just works, and you just got to fight for it. So, yeah, that really makes sense to me. But
And one thing I've always had a very strong relationship with my assistant.
mm,
Um, because however much you like the producer, and they, of course, they vary enormously, but there is a little bit of a dichotomy. The producer normally wants to work again at the studio, so he wants it to be on time, he wants it to be on budget, and of course he wants it to be good, but he doesn't want it to be good to the exclusion of everything else, like I do. And so I always get a very close relationship with my assistant, I always tell him, listen to the plots, listen, tell me what's going on behind me. You know what I'm saying? Because
Mm.
it's a war. It is a war, really is.
I mean, in terms of filmmaking, you certainly need to have a thick skin, I think, to be able to get your vision across, you know?
I think so. I think so.
Mm.
Well, I think so.
Mm.
I understand their point of view. I mean, this happened actually on Deep Water. I was hanging on to tunes that I liked that you put on with the temp music. Then they work, and you think, I've got to hang on to that. And of course, they they want library music, and so you have to fight and say no, 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 and just sort of win.
Mm.
If you don't win, they'll lose. They'll win. I mean, it's silly, really, because I'm painting a black picture, and it isn't always at all. But it is a battle. It is a battle to hang on to stuff.
Mm. But one film that's in the season that we haven't mentioned is, of course, Flashdance, which was a huge film. I think it's one of those defining films of its era, in terms of the music, the fashion, the style of the film, even everything about it just sort of just clicks, I think, and it's a wonderful to look at now. It's this wonderful summary, I think, of different sensibilities that were happening at the time, you know. But they're all captured together. But I understand that what really attracted you to the project was the filming of the dance scenes. And they look they still look great. I think they're very striking in the film, whether it's in the club, whether it's at the end with the at the school or whatever. Would that be true? That the dance routines were something that really intrigued you about that film?
Well, I didn't like the script very much, and I actually turned the movie down twice, I think, and then finally I thought, well, look, they got to myself that they're going to make this. They have $8 million, which was quite a lot of money,
Hmm.
um, that they've committed to making it. So I thought, rather than wait around endlessly for something that you adore, just try and make it good, and so I did. There's a danger of being too precious, I think, about what you'll do or what not, what you won't do. I remember, having the executives at the studio in a sort of dance studio at Paramount with bleachers. They're all sitting on the bleachers watching me down the bottom of the bleachers with a girl, and I had a hose. I remember I had a hose, and I was wrapping the hose around this poor girl and trying to explain what I was going to do with a wet dance.
Mm.
I didn't know, and at that stage I hadn't got a clue what to do, but I knew that it would be fun, the water flying off, and her skin would look nice because it would be shiny and there'd be a sheen. And it also had humorous possibilities because it would drench the audience, when she moved around.
Hmm.
And so, that's fun. I literally hadn't got a clue what I was going to do, but I knew I could do something with water. But
Hmm.
the faces of the executives, I remember it with a skepticism, all looking down. I was, we're up there somewhere.
Christian in the Lions. It sounds like they're a Roman Colosseum or something.
Fun, it's fun, really. I like that sort of challenge, where you're threshing around and you really don't know how to do it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and yet
um,
you had a very clear vision that something would work.
yes, I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, yes, I did. In retrospect, it worked out
Hmm.
because people still do sort of send ups of it, of
Hmm.
the stuff falling on people's heads
Hmm.
and bullets instead of water. So that's fun. I remember on Flashdance somebody saying, "Do you know that they're all wearing the t-shirt that she wore in the you know with the where it was hanging off her shoulder,
Mm.
they're all wearing t-shirts like that." And I said, "Oh, they are." I mean, I hadn't noticed,
Hmm.
and I went out in the street and literally saw it over and over again. So that's fun when
Hmm.
that happens.
Hmm.
And it's fun. For example, when we were doing when I was doing the wardrobe and she was changing from one outfit to another, Jennifer Beals, and then she did that thing where she sort of managed to pull her bra down, the sleeve of her t-shirt. And I never knew how she undid it. I mean, it was just intriguing. And again, I sort of wrote it down. I've got to put that in somewhere.
Hmm.
So I put that in when Michael Nuri, I think, came back to her loft, and it made the scene. Without that, it would have been nothing.
Hmm.
It made, here's him trying to work it out.
So, this has been wonderful, Adrian. I would just like to ask you one last question, if that's okay, just to wrap
Oh,
up
sure.
on. Now, this might be a very difficult question, but of your work, of your own films, do you have a favorite?
I suppose, Jacob's Ladder in a way. I mean, I literally talked about it to Bruce Rubin for a year before we did anything. I mean, those were the days, when you could do
Hmm.
that. Literally for a year, and we were at different sort of points of view. Really, he wanted a very much a Judeo-Christian, recognizable hell, recognizable heaven. With the stairs and the clouds and the pillars and I wanted it sort of rooted in reality, because especially with the demons, it was a conversation that went on forever. But he liked the sort of Bosch, those Bosch paintings, where there's a devil that's got I guess, cleft hooves or whatever, and he's got the tail and he's got and the pitchfork. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And I just thought that if you see recognizable imagery, then it wouldn't be frightening because
Mm.
you've seen it all. So I wanted it to be sort of flesh based and for you not quite to be able to get a grip on it, and always I think the less you see something, the less clearly you see something, the better.
Mm.
If you see it in clarity, then there's no mystery. Your imagination is way better at filling in the blanks. That for example, that sort of, and I didn't do any special effects afterwards. None. There was absolutely none afterwards. It was all in the camera.
Hmm.
And it was finding out as you went along. I mean, for example, he sees a homeless guy with this weird sort of tail. It's almost like a penis, and it sort of, when it came out this way, it looked like an erection. And it was sort of funny. But when we put it in reverse, and it was just a mechanical thing of
Hmm.
somebody pumping something or, a lever or whatever.
Hmm.
But when you shot it in reverse and it sort of hid away underneath his coat in a sort of furtive way, suddenly it wasn't a penis anymore. Suddenly it
Hmm.
was something I couldn't quite get a fix on. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I mean, that thing I did I'd shoot for 4 frames. I remember it was 4 frames, and get the actor, demonic actor or whatever, it's supposed to be or whatever. Get him to move around like this, and if you looked at it for a second, it was absurd. But if you looked at it for a third of a second, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a
Mm.
sort of crazed thing with a good noise. Got to add it, something sort of scary. It worked well because people didn't quite know what it was.
Hmm.
It's been copied a lot, actually.
Hmm. I mean, it's intriguing that it's your only horror film to date, anyway. As in, there might be
Yeah,
something in the future, but it's your only horror film, and yet it has been so influential, and it has become a film that is acknowledged in the genre as a significant horror film. Because that
yeah,
imagery really does resonate. It is that lack of clarity in those shots and those scenes, I think, that
right, right.
really do work incredibly well. And the fact that it's all kind of in-house rather than being digitally created, or
Well, it's
whether
more
it be,
organic. It's more
yeah,
organic.
organic. Yeah.
I mean, I looked at a lot of Francis Bacon pictures, obviously, because
Mm.
they're blurry and streaked, and you can't see them clearly. And it's because you can't see them clearly, you can't see the horror that's going on underneath, that they're so effective and so
Hmm.
frightening.